Welcome dear students. So today we begin our class for the subject environmental impact assessment. So yesterday during the Google Meet I gave you a brief introduction or brief idea on what is environmental impact assessment. So in this subject we have 6 modules like all other subjects, and in the first module these are the topics that will be covered, that is introduction or classification of pollution and pollutants, then evolution of the EIA, elements of EIA, public consultation, environmental clearance process in India, and the key elements in 2006 EIA notification. So these are the topics that will be discussed in module 1, and after you study the whole subject we'll have a clear idea on what is pollution, what are the different types of pollution, what are the characteristics of various pollutants, what is environmental impact assessment or EIA, what are the steps for doing EIA, the methodology adopted, the EIA procedure in India, and various case studies. So these will be the topics that will be covered in this subject. Now coming to the first module, we'll be today discussing what is pollution, what are the different types of pollution, and what is a pollutant, and what are the different types of pollutants. So before we start, what is EIA or environmental impact assessment? I'm very sure that of late you all would have heard the term EIA, because in the news we have been hearing about EIA draft 2020. In the print media as well as visual media you would have heard or read or watched a lot of articles on this. So we will not discuss it now, we will go to such discussions later on. So what is EIA? So EIA is actually or EIA or environmental impact assessment is actually a process of evaluating the likely environmental impacts of any proposed project or development. So this is actually by taking into account the interrelated socio-economic, cultural and human health impacts. This again, when you say impact, it includes both the beneficial as well as the adverse impacts. So EIA is actually a tool which is used to assess the positive and negative environmental, economic and social impacts of a project, and this is actually used to predict the impacts of a project, particularly in the pre-planning stage, so that decisions can be taken to reduce the adverse impacts. So today we will be discussing about classification of pollution and pollutants. So we know that the word environment is actually derived from the French word which means the surrounding, that is environ. It is derived from the French word environ, which means the surrounding. And also our surrounding includes biotic factors like the human beings, the plants, the animals, microbes, etc. and also abiotic factors such as light, air, water, soil, etc. So we can say that environment is actually a complex of many variables that surrounds man and all other living organisms. And also the environment includes water, air and land, and also the interrelationships which exist among the water, air, land and the human beings, including other living creatures, plants, animals, microorganisms, etc. So we know that the natural environment consists of 4 interlinking systems, and they are the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere and the biosphere. These 4 systems are actually in constant change, and such changes are affected by various human activities, and by definition we can say that the environment refers to the sum total of all conditions which surround man at a given point of time and space. So introduction to pollution and pollutants. So what is pollution? Pollution is actually defined as the introduction of contaminants into a natural environment which causes disorder, instability, or it causes harm or discomfort to the ecosystem. And pollution also takes the form of, it can be in the form of chemical substances or energy such as noise, heat or light. These are the different types of pollution. As we see, air pollution, water pollution, soil or land pollution, noise pollution, radioactive pollution and environmental pollution. What is air pollution? So again, air pollution is actually the contamination of the natural air by mixing it with different pollutants like harmful fumes and chemicals. And this is one of the most prevalent and the dangerous form of pollution, especially which is considered to go hand in hand with urbanization. There are many reasons of air pollution, and the primary reason is the excessive fuel combustion, which has become a basic necessity for cooking, transport and other industrial activities. So air pollution actually releases a large amount of chemicals to the air, which directly affect the existence of all forms. And smoke releases sulfur dioxide into the air, which makes it more toxic, and it is caused mainly due to the chimneys, the factory stacks, vehicles, or something as common as burning of fuel, etc. Also, it leads to various health effects, or there can be increase in cases of asthma, bronchitis, and even more dangerous lung cancer, etc., especially in the case of metro cities. And now coming to water pollution. So water pollution is actually the contamination of the water on the earth, and it occurs in lakes. We know that various sources of water like lakes, ocean, river, and even the underground reservoirs. So water pollution is one of the most dangerous form of pollution, because it decreases the amount of drinkable water which is available. It can also reduce the amount of water which can be used for irrigation, because it will be harmful to the wildlife that depends on the water. And water pollution is also a major cause of disease caused to the non-aquatic species. Also, water pollution affects or it harms the aquatic beings, and also contaminates the entire food chain by severely affecting the humans that are dependent on these. And more diseases like cholera, diarrhea, etc., that are waterborne also are caused due to water pollution. Now coming to the soil pollution or land pollution, it is actually the contamination of the soil or the land that prevents the growth of the natural life, and it includes land for cultivating, also wildlife and other habitation land. And common causes of soil pollution, mainly it includes non-sustainable farming practices, hazardous wastage that seeps into the soil, mining, littering, etc. And also the use of insecticides and pesticides which will be absorbed by the soil also makes it unfit for plants. And the release of various industrial waste, mining and deforestation also exploits the soil. The soil pollution also can result in reduced growth of agriculture, as well as poisoning of the land nearby the water sources. Coming to noise pollution. So noise pollution is also caused when a noise of very high intensity, usually we refer noise in decibels. So when the intensity of noise is usually referred in decibels. So noise pollution is actually caused when the noise has a very high intensity which is greater than 85 decibels, and this pollution actually disrupts the ability of a person to perform and can be termed as noise pollution. And it also results in the temporary or permanent loss of hearing, as well as disturbances to the wildlife. It also leads to various psychological problems like stress, hypertension, etc. And the most adverse effect of noise pollution can be leading to permanent hearing impairment. Now coming to the next type of pollution, that is radioactive pollution. So this is one of the most dangerous forms of pollution because it is extremely harmful and can even result in death. So this pollution actually has risen in the 20th century because of a rise of atomic physics and nuclear weapons. And radioactive pollution also results in the pollution of or it enhances the pollution of the air and land with radioactive poisoning. It can also happen from leakages or accidents at nuclear power plants, as well as from improper disposal of the nuclear waste. And this pollution results in various adverse effects like defects by birth, then cancer, deteriorating of the health, and finally it may also lead to death. So we can sum up and say that environmental pollution is any undesirable change in the physical, chemical or biological characteristics of any component of the environment, that is namely the air, land, water, etc., and which causes harmful effects in the various forms of life or property. Now coming to the next topic, that is pollutant. So what is a pollutant? So pollutant is something which causes pollution, or it is something that pollutes. So any substance like it may be in the form of a chemical or any other waste product which renders the air, the soil, the water or any other natural resource harmful or unstable, we call such a substance as a pollutant. So there are different types of pollutants. So pollutants may be classified based upon their existence in nature, how or in which form they exist in nature, the form in which they persist after being released into the atmosphere, and also the way in which they are removed or accumulated in the environment, and also it is classified based on their source. So we'll see each of these. So depending upon their existence in nature, so based on how it exists in nature, we can classify pollutants into two types, namely quantitative pollutants and qualitative pollutants. So quantitative pollutants, they normally occur in the environment and acquire the status of a pollutant when their concentration increases due to some human activities. For example, carbon dioxide, it actually occurs in nature and it acquires a status of, when we call it a pollutant only when their concentration increases to such a level, and then we call it as quantitative pollutant based on the amount of pollutant. When it comes to qualitative pollutants, they actually do not occur naturally and they are added by the man, for example insecticides. So I hope it is clear, quantitative pollutants and qualitative pollutants. Now depending upon the form in which they persist after being released into the atmosphere, we can classify them into two types, that is primary pollutants and secondary pollutants. So primary pollutants are those that are emitted directly from the source and persist in the form in which they were added to the environment. So there will be no change in that. So as it is emitted from the source, it exists in the same form, we call it as the primary pollutant. And for the best example for the primary pollutants are dust, ash, hydrocarbons, etc. And secondary pollutants are those which are formed from the primary pollutants. So by various chemical reactions, what happens is the primary pollutants will take different other forms. So they are actually derived from the primary pollutants, we call them as the secondary pollutants. Now depending upon the way in which they are removed or accumulated in the environment, we can classify them into biodegradable and non-biodegradable pollutants. Here again the term itself explains it. So biodegradable means those pollutants which can be decomposed or destroyed or degraded by the living organism. For example, wood, all these organic waste, we can say they are biodegradable pollutants. And non-biodegradable pollutants are those which cannot be degraded or decomposed or destroyed. For example, plastic, which is one of the most important or the most difficult waste which cannot be, there is no solution for plastic waste disposal, because it is one of the most important form of non-biodegradable waste, and also DDT, etc. Now again depending upon the source, so depending upon the source, the pollutants may be classified as natural pollutant and man-made pollutant. So any pollutant that is released from natural resources like volcanic eruptions, wind-borne, and also other forms, we call it natural forms, we call it as natural pollutant. And all those pollutants which are released due to various human activities, we call it as man-made pollutants. So man-made pollutants occur mainly due to various activities which may be commercial, domestic, industrial, etc. And some examples for man-made pollution or pollutants are pesticides, the radioactive substances, insecticides, etc. So these are the different types of pollutants. So we can conclude this is just an introductory part of what is a pollution, what is meant by pollution, what are the different types of pollution, what do you mean by a pollutant, and what are the different types of pollutants. So in the next class we will be discussing in detail what is EIA and what are the various steps involved in EIA, the methodology, etc. Thank you.